I want to talk about how AI's future is both more dangerous and wonderful than you think, and sort of practical tips and thinking mechanisms for capturing the shift and taking advantage of this. I've been worked at Forbes for more than 30 years. I'm frankly on the what I like to consider the emeritus part of my career at Forbes. I was publisher for 20 years from 1998 to 2018. I've also written a lot of books on what distinguishes really good companies from also-rans. This one was called The Soft Edge. This one was called Team Genius. And then a book that is available for all of you following this talk at the conclusion of this session is a book on late bloomers. By the way, are any of you Major League Baseball fans? Do you follow this relief pitcher for the San Diego Padres who throws 104 miles an hour? He's about 6'5" and 220 pounds. I think his name is Mason Miller. Anyway, he went to a Division III school. That would be a late bloomer. No scholarship, went to a Division III school. How does a talent like that get away? Well, in his case, he was 6'5", 150 pounds. When he entered college, and it was not discovered until he was 19 years old that he had diabetes type 1. So he couldn't put on weight, he couldn't gain strength, he couldn't throw more than about 85 miles an hour, and then when that was figured out, he became, now many believe, is the dominant relief pitcher in Major League Baseball. Well, that's the concept of late bloomers, is that there's more talent out there than we can imagine. They just haven't been captured by standard mechanisms. And this is going to become really important in the age of AI, because we're going to fall for the fallacy, if we don't watch it, that only people who scored 800 on their math SAT, are the kind of people that can move us forward in the age of AI. Well, there aren't that many of them, number one. And number two, if you find them, you're going to pay out the nose for them. So finding the late bloomers is really a great strategy. So that's why I'm really excited about that topic. And then I do a lot of work with Forbes Asia and our Forbes Global CEO conference. So in my 30-year-plus career at Forbes, I was based in Silicon Valley, working for a New York finance magazine based in the heart of the technology innovation land. And one of the people I got to meet was one of the founding fathers of the venture capital industry, a guy named Don Valentine. He's passed away, but he founded what is still a dominant venture capital firm called Sequoia Capital. And I asked Don what was the secret of his success. And he said, it's very simple. If you invest in the right quadrant of future possibilities, you'll win. Now, if you're clever or lucky, you might get a few small wins if you invest in the wrong 3 quadrants. So that my job today is to maybe get you to think about, what does the right quadrant look like? I think all of us in this room are smart enough to avoid the quadrant that is directly opposite the best quadrant. It's the other 2 quadrants that can be, they can look good, and they can be staffed with good people, and the press can say good things about them, that can really lead us astray and cause us to waste our time and our capital. So if we can get in the right quadrant. For an example, what was Don talking about? Don said, if you understand 2 things, you are way ahead of most people in business. Number one is the trajectory of technology. In Silicon Valley, anything digital was governed by a phenomenon known as Moore's Law. How fast are semiconductors improving? And we know that, and you just have to have faith in the future and say, will this, do we think this trend is going to continue? And if you do, run out the numbers. Therefore, you would know what kind of computation would be available at what kind of a price 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 15. Well, that's really valuable. Can we say the same thing about the age of AI? I think we can. People smarter than I say that. Jensen Huang, the founder and CEO of NVIDIA believes that, and I'll get to that. If we know that, if we just know how fast is this critter progressing on a cost ability curve going forward, 5 years, 10 years, 15, then we'll be a lot smarter about how we allocate capital and allocate our time. The other one, Don Valentine said, if you know about demographics, you will know, combine that with technology progression, you will know a lot. Well, what do we know today? We know China's population has peaked and going down. We know the world population has probably peaked. We know India even is probably peaked. If you know these things, if you know technology is moving at this rate, and you know the global population, particularly in the manufacturing center of the world, is going down, what does it predict? It predicts a robotics boom, for example. So just sort of, getting those big things together, you'll get in the right quadrant. Don Valentine said you can be randomly successful. You can throw darts, and if you hit the right quadrant, you're going to do a lot better than if you work your butt off trying to foresee the future, but you're in the wrong quadrant to begin with. So that's the concept there. It's a really good one. One of the things that we get too fixated on is the era that we live in, politics, economics, and so on. And, will something happen or will it not happen because of what's going on in the background? Well, 100 years ago, the 1920s. Now, we think about the 1920s. We think about the 20s as a boom decade. The stock market boomed. A lot of people believe that sort of the birth of modern life, modern urban life in particular, really began with the 1920s. But the 1920s actually began abysmally. I mean, it predict how the 1920s ended up versus the first 18 months to 24 months of the 1920s, no one would have predicted. If you extrapolated the crap that was going on in the early 1920s, you couldn't have foreseen, all the miracles that were going to come in the rest of the decade. For example, this is how the 20s began. Spanish flu, which had killed 50 million people globally, multiply that by about 5 today to get the kind of deaths that occurred from this disease. Well, the peak year was 1918, but it wasn't suddenly over in 1919. It lingered on, it just tailed off, but we started the decade with a pandemic. The world was coming off of World War I, and so there was a lot of deflation because a lot of spending that had gone into the war stopped happening. There was a farm labor technology boom that replaced farm labor called tractors, the internal combustion engine combined with harvesters and things like that. And so we had a farm labor exodus into the cities. You had a lot of unemployment in the cities. Cities were overcrowded. The stock market was horrible the first 18 months of the 1920s. The stocks dropped 47% over that period of time. That was an awful start. It was one of the worst starts to a decade that you can imagine. The first half of the 2020s has been pretty turbulent, wouldn't you say? Politically, economically, stock market up and down. Nobody, we don't even know whether deflation or inflation is a bigger threat right now. We make our best guesses, but there's a lot of confusion out there, but it's not going to stop this AI revolution. So, after things settled down in the 20s, we got a brand new world. Widespread electrification, plumbing, washing machines, skyscraper boom, automobile ubiquity, not just for the rich. Radio and newspapers absolutely boomed, creating a mass media culture, mass media heroes in film, sports, urban lifestyles. These are some of the mass media heroes that newspapers and radio created in the world of sports. We didn't have those kind of people the decade before. They were just as good of athletes, in the 19-teens, but there was no way for the broad masses to know about them. Lindbergh was probably the biggest pop culture hero of all in 1927 when he solo crossed the Atlantic non-stop. Stocks in the 1920s, they started out abysmally, they soared. Of course, at the very end, they crashed again and lingered into the first several years of the 1930s. But it was an extraordinary volatile decade. And then just briefly, 50 years ago, the 1970s, started out not so bad. A lot of hope in the beginning of the 1970s, and then it all kind of went sideways and continued that way for the rest of the decade. There's a brief, kind of humble bull market to begin the decade, but that's what it did over the course of the decade. These are some of the things that plagued us in the 1970s. If you're old enough to remember, few of you are, as I look about enviously at the youth and vitality in this crowd. But look at some of the things that happened. The oil embargo, Vice President Agnew resigned to disgrace. What could possibly top that, people said. So a year later, we found out we had a recession where stocks dropped nearly 50% from 73 to 75. The fall of Saigon really was, it seems like a trivial event now. And in history, maybe historically, it's not that big a deal. But at the time, it was a real embarrassment for the U.S. Military leadership, political leadership. Oil embargo 2 really kind of ground in inflation that would really take off in the early 1980s. And then Jimmy Carter gave a speech that is one of the most puzzling speeches that a U.S. president's ever given in the summer of '79, where he blamed Americans for being too down in the dumps, and that was our problem. He didn't use the word melees. The Boston Herald called it the melees speech. It's probably one of the things that torpedoed his reelection hopes in 1980. Still a new world was born. Still a new world was born. It might have been one of the greatest decades of innovation and entrepreneurship. FedEx was born, Apple, Microsoft, and Oracle were born. Intel released the microprocessor in 1971, which led immediately to personal calculators, then to computers by the end of the decade. Biotech was born in the 1970s with the birth of Genentech. And then something we don't think about, because it's indirectly related to technology, but also to demographics, was that we started becoming not a culture that was simply a mass consumer culture. We became a single interest culture. We started atomizing along what we like to do as individuals or with our friends. The running boom created Nike. The fitness boom led to the bicycling boom, which created specialized bicycles and Trek bicycles in the 1970s. Starbucks. I mean, who would have ever believed that you could have sort of European coffee-style cafes in the United States? Well, Howard Schultz did, and that there would be people who would pay that much for a cup of coffee, and still now. All of these companies were born in the 1970s, a crummy economic decade. So whether the next 5 years turns out to be, what we all hope, a recovery of economic growth that is more robust and more certain than we have now, or whether it goes sideways or even backwards, the business record of innovation and entrepreneurship says these things don't stop. They persist in good times, bad times, medium times. Now, if anything, I believe AI is underhyped, and I'll tell you why. AI is like fire. It requires 3 ingredients. You've heard many of them. You might get a little sort of different weighting of all of these 3 ingredients, but it requires algorithms, computational power, and data. And to understand why AI is now moving so stunningly fast, look to the rapid progress in algorithms, compute, and data. And you have to posit that at least one of these is really slowing down or is going to slow down if you think AI is overhyped. Well, algorithms. We've watched computer software, enterprise software, over the last several years and few decades go from being able to analyze to being able to predict to now being able to learn. That, by the way, is sort of the father of modern algorithms. He was also, I don't know if you're a fan of the marathon and road racing, but this weekend in London, 2 runners, one from Kenya and one from Ethiopia, broke 2 hours in the marathon in a real race. The Kenyan won by 15 seconds. He dropped a 4:12 mile at mile 24 to separate himself from number 2. A 4:12 mile in mile 24. Anyway, this chap finished fifth in the British Olympic marathon trials in 1948, when road racing shoes were basically bathroom slippers with laces. They were they weren't anything like they are today. But he wasn't known for his marathon running prowess. He was known for leading a code-breaking project at Bletchley Park in London during World War II. I'm talking about Alan Turing, of course. And there was his code-breaking machine. They broke the German Enigma code, and what gave the Allies a great advantage. You may know him as Benedict Cumberbatch, played him in the movie The Imitation Game, which gave, I think, Turing some notoriety that had been that history had kept from him. But it was the idea, why I say he's sort of the father of algorithms and AI, at least conceptually. In 1950, he proposed, somebody asked him, when will we have artificial intelligence, or when will we reach a threshold of accomplishment in this technology? And he said, when you put a computer and a human being behind a curtain, and the person on the other side of the curtain asking them questions won't know which one is which. And that was called the Turing test. Have we reached the Turing test? Well, we don't have general artificial intelligence yet. We're edging up to it. But anyway, Alan Turing kind of set it in motion. And AI, if you've been following the field, ever since the 1950s, Marvin Minsky at MIT and others, there have been false dawns in AI. Why is this new era different? Well, the algorithms and the computation, the algorithms changed, the computation has gotten so much better, and data is everywhere and collectible. But in 2017, Vinod Khosla, co-founder of Sun Microsystems and a very successful venture capitalist, told me when I interviewed him on stage, it was really the key year was 2017, when a Google white paper came up with a new way of, and a much more streamlined way and a much more cloud-friendly way of really getting learning out of artificial intelligence, which you need to have. That was the name of the paper. Those are the people who wrote the paper. And things have been quite a bit different. They called the Google people nicknamed it the transformer. They said it's superior in quality, being more scalable in the cloud, and requiring significantly less time to train. Then we had an accident. One of these things that I love about capitalism is there's no better system than the free market at surfacing the upside surprise. Capitalism and the free market will always be the planned economy, because planned economies don't account for the upside surprise. They can't. It's not even in their agenda to do so. But capitalism, the upside surprise, the mother of all upside surprises in this industry was that a computer gaming company called NVIDIA happened to make a chip board for graphics, graphics processing for computer gaming that just happened to map with these new algorithms in AI. And lo and behold, we get the modern juggernaut that is called NVIDIA. As recently as 3 or 4 years ago, a blink of the eye, NVIDIA still had more revenue per year from computer gaming than it did from AI. Now it's about 30 to 1 AI versus computer gaming. But it was one of those upside surprises, and Jensen Huang will tell you it was an upside surprise. The credit was that he recognized it and pounced on it like a fare-thee-well. But you need that kind of progress in computation to get us to where we are today. Now, I mentioned Moore's Law, Gordon Moore, that little yellow arrow. These are the guys that founded Fairchild Semiconductor, which made the first chips for NASA. NASA, in its brilliance, picked this new company to build computation from the ground up, as opposed to getting IBM to do it and try to shrink their large iron technology fit into a space capsule, into the 15-pound limit or whatever it was, and it couldn't do it. You needed something from the ground up, and this new thing called the silicon chips made it. That was 1959. In 1965, Gordon Moore, one of those guys, said, you know, it's really interesting here, but this new industry, the silicon chip industry, is able to double the amount of transistors on a unit of space, a two-dimensional space, that is constant, and it's able to double the amount of transistor equivalents etched into the silicon about every 18 months or so. He kind of toggled back, was it 12 months, 18 months, 24 months, and he kind of, you know, gradually got 18 months. And he said that he didn't nickname it this, but one of the electronics magazines did, and they called it Moore's Law. It wasn't a law, it was an observation. It was an extrapolation of an observation. But for business people, it was huge. It meant that over the next 60 years, in the silicon business, the chip industry would provide products that provided about a 30% annual improvement in digital bang for the buck. Now, clumsy software could ruin that sort of gain, but think about that. Think about anything compounding at 30% rate over 60 years. How would you like your 401k to compound at 30% per year? You know, Warren Buffett, who recently retired, Berkshire Hathaway has had a compound annual return of about 22% over its life. Buffett, as a professional investor, you know, Buffett was investing on his own, small, you know, little college endowments and friends' money before Berkshire, and he produced closer to a 30% annual return. A company the size of Berkshire, you know, it just can't get in and out of the market to produce a 30% return. But this is what the digital industry has produced, just ticking along. And every year there would be people say, well, it's got to slow down. It just has to slow down. Photolithography can't get down to the atomic level, but it seems to keep doing that, and it's kept up. Well, just sort of what do you get from that? Well, you get all of these things over the course of time. You know, just not that many decades, you go from calculators to what we have, you know, to the supercomputer that you have in your pocket called an iPhone today. That's what that kind of progress allows. You get disruption. Did you know that the newspaper's industry's most profitable year was 1999? When newspaper profitability in the US went, it went so fast. That should be a lesson for all of us. And you know, I'm closer to that sort of disruption than the insurance industry is. But the insurance industry is not, you know, a million miles away from the potential of that kind of rapid disruption. But that's how fast it went. And it went with something, again, an upside surprise. Nobody predicted it. A little company called Craigslist basically took out the heart of the most profitable part of the news industry, which is classified ads. You know, once newspapers lost classified ads and the profit margins of classified ads, 50% of their revenue, 80% of their margins gone, you know, in less than half a decade. Gone to a competitor, gone to nothing, gone to Nowheresville, gone to something, you know, that nobody had ever heard of, Craigslist, and other Craigslist imitators. So that's what happened. You know, that's that level, that pace of disruption that Moore's Law led to a lot of industries changing, and not gradually, but rather suddenly. Well, I mentioned the new algorithms today. Here's what Jensen Huang previously mentioned. Here's what he thinks. If there was a Moore's Law today happening in AI, he thinks it's 50 to 100% root level improvement per year. It doesn't mean that IT people are seeing it. I mean, we all see the kind of charts that were shown just 20 minutes ago, where people are worried about their investment and whether it's working out. But you look at the root level of improvement in this, and you look at the computational end, and it is extraordinary. NVIDIA, is now the most valuable company on the face of the earth. I mean, it just, nobody would have predicted that, just as Jensen Huang himself would not have predicted that he would be the engine of the AI revolution. Now, Google and Amazon are determined, looking at NVIDIA's margins, are determined to get into that industry. And there's a company called Cerebras that may do an IPO this year that is doing a pizza-sized wafer, and it's a data center in a box concept that could be really interesting. And they're claiming an equivalent level of compute power for 1/10 the electricity costs of NVIDIA chips. So that could be very interesting as that becomes a political and social issue, the cost of electricity. And now data. You need ingredient number 3, data. You need discoverable, accessible, and always refreshing data. I mean, the data, the history of Major League Baseball is really interesting data, but it's not refreshing, it's dead. Once it's in the past, it doesn't change. So you need data that is discoverable, accessible, and it continually is refreshing. Well, that sounds like, how much data is in the, do you think that the 8 billion people who inhabit planet Earth have? Each one of us is a data machine of health and nutrition and all kinds of stuff. So this idea that we'll run out of data, which some people think will be what stops the AI juggernaut, I think is just simply not, because you go from human beings to animals to crops, you go to any kind of living organism, you go to anything. This is how data is growing so far through 2025. So AI is like fire. It requires 3 ingredients: algorithms, compute, and data. Are any one of these slowing down? That's my question. They're all wildly accelerating. That's why I believe that the AI revolution is underhyped. I'm not saying, I'm not saying that Anthropic, when it goes public in a few months at an 800 billion valuation, is undervalued, maybe wildly overvalued. But so were the companies in the late 1990s. But as a movement, I think AI is still misunderstood and underhyped, if anything. If we properly hyped it, it would scare the crap out of us, is the problem. And I think that, and we don't want to go there necessarily. This is sort of I want you to think about, I think this will be a big growth area in many aspects of the insurance industry, is the coming together of atoms and bits. Nicholas Negroponte of MIT sort of offered a useful way of looking at the world: the atoms economy and the bits economy. The bits economy is the algorithmic economy. It's media, it's entertainment, it's anything that is reducible to bits or algorithms, software, all of that. It's become a large part of the global GDP, maybe a quarter or a third of the global GDP right now. But the majority of the economy is still in physical things. It's in mining, it's in manufacturing, it's in growing crops, it's in processing crops into food, it's energy and all of that. The coming together of atoms and bits, I think, is going to be the really interesting story going forward. Robotics is a perfect example of that. And so I think over the course, this has already started, which I use 2020 as kind of a rough starting point. But all of these industries are going to be really transformed. It's harder to disrupt, by the way, in Adam's business. Adam's businesses are usually more heavily regulated. Their cost of capital is a lot higher. Their return on capital isn't so high, so people don't want to be in, it doesn't have the competition, that software and algorithmic businesses do, which offer, if you get it right, an extraordinarily rapid return on capital. But all of these industries, I believe, are on the cusp of some pretty profound change with new players, and there are going to be more risks than you can imagine that come with the opportunity. Adam's companies are more risky. Robotics is going to offer a lot of benefits, and it's going to produce a lot of risks, is just sort of one small example. Big changes, I think we don't expect big changes in the physical world. Our grandparents saw big changes in the physical world. They saw, from the Wright brothers in 1903 to putting 2 men on the moon in 1969, they saw extraordinary things: skyscrapers, automobile ubiquity. We have seen all of these algorithmic miracles from biotech to software, but I think we're going to be back into an era where some of the changes happen in the physical world are going to surprise us. That was 1900 on Fifth Avenue, Easter Sunday, one car, all those horses. And then, not exactly the same angle, but close, 13 years later, one horse and all those cars. So that's what a world where things change physically can look like. The bits disruption is already well underway. I mean, software writes itself now with a lot of these AI programs. Advertising and marketing is completely changed. Art and entertainment. You know, LA is in a panic. LA is got a lot of political and economic problems right now, but the entertainment industry, there's just a lot of job loss going on right now. Anybody who doesn't think that AI hasn't had a consequence in costuming and everything else hasn't been paying attention. Certainly the people in that industry have. Insurance and actuarial planning, I mean, the whole conference dedicated to that, so you forget more in 24 hours than I could possibly learn about your industry in my remaining lifetime, but it's going to be extraordinary, I believe. Legal and accounting services, education, and healthcare. That's ChatGPT's DALL-E. That's what it took 10 seconds to come up with give me a 1965 red Mustang in the Napa Valley. Boom, that's what it drew. Does it belong in the Louvre? No. But it's, is work that level going to have an impact on commercial illustration? Most certainly it is. Not quite so good with the Lincoln Continental in Palm Springs, but that's pretty cool looking too. It just doesn't look as much like a Lincoln Continental. AI success insights. I believe that AI acceleration will create fogs of uncertainty in business. Here's an example. This is the Milky Way. It's an illustration. It's a composite based on photos from the Webb telescope, right? You are here, kind of a thing. If you were traveling, if you had Harrison Ford's Millennium Falcon in Star Wars, and you could travel at the speed of light, would it look like that? If you were actually in the thick of it, would it look like that? No, it would look more like that. And as AI accelerates the economy, the future looks more and more like that is the issue. So, who are the Webb telescopes in your industry? Who are the trusted sources? Trust is becoming a bigger and bigger deal going forward, and that's why vendors like ReSource Pro, I think, are in a really sweet spot, because to the degree you have, I've seen this work in a lot of industries where it's the institution with trust that emerges stronger than ever. It sounds like trust is an old virtue, but it paradoxically becomes more important. Fred Smith, whom I got to know when I was writing my book, The Soft Edge, he's since passed away a year or two ago, founder of $92 billion global revenue powerhouse FedEx, said trust is the core to your structure. And he actually codified what trust looks like for all the executives at FedEx and all the employees. Two things that stood out there, they don't seem like consequential things, except when you add little things that add up. Don't be late to meetings. It says when you're late to meetings, you're showing, you're sowing distrust for your what else should people now think about you and think about that they really don't do what they say they're going to do? And FedEx is one of the cleanest operations. I mean, you're driving around. It's in, where the passenger terminal is at the Memphis airport. FedEx is on the other side of that, and it's about 10 times as big. When you drive through that, you won't see a stray piece of paper blowing around. You won't see, an oil drop or any of that kind of stuff, because they're absolutely fanatic about it, because, again, he believes that the absence of cleanliness is just cancer to trust. Charlie Munger felt that Warren Buffett's partner, who lived and invested in, until age 99, believes that success in business and life accrues to the hard work of winning deserved trust. And whenever he gave like a commencement speech to high schools, which he would do throughout LA, where he lived, it would always be, put yourself, 20 years into the future and imagine that nobody trusts you, and now apply that against your goals that you say you have and see how far that's going to get you. So he was really big on that. AI success insight number 3, best work is done by small teams under the umbrella of trust. I think there's an opportunity. This is where you really have to figure out what is required by regulation and what's become a habit because of regulation. If it's required, it's required. If it's become a habit and you can do the same job even better 10 times as fast with more autonomy in the organization by using small informal teams to get the job done, if you can do that, you're not violating regulation or putting anybody at risk, then you've got a huge advantage. So small autonomous teams, I think, are the future because that's embedding entrepreneurialism inside of your company. And there you will discover who the managers of the future are, and a lot of them will be the late bloomers, and a lot of them will be the ones that don't have the elite MBA degrees and so on and so forth. The more fast things move, the more adaptability counts. Craig Arnold, CEO of Eaton, the real competitive advantage is the quality and adaptability of your teams. So AI is going to be it's going to introduce this entrepreneurial secret sauce inside of organizations, and the organizations that are going to thrive are the ones that are going to be highly adaptable and use it that way, thus the argument for smaller teams. This is a company in Australia that has 84% gross margins, a software company, because its high trust culture means very low bureaucratic overhead. They're in Australia, so the rules are different, but they don't have HR. There are a lot of things that they don't have because everybody votes on how the day went as they leave the building at the end of the day, like on a 1 to 5 scale. So they get this sort of running tally of the mood of the company, and they begin to adapt to that. It's sort of indirect, but it works brilliantly for them. Whole brain teams are a force multiplier. Whole brain teams, introverts and extroverts, intuitive people and highly analytical people. That's what I mean by that. If you can put them together in a team, you will get a picture. The problem is if you put all MBAs or all finance majors into the room, you probably have collectively a higher math SAT score. Do you have a whole brain team? I don't know, for you to ask. But this should be, I'm predicting that another paradox will be that the well-rounded liberal arts major who's curious, will be some of the early adoptive winners of the AI boom. Because they're curious, they will keep asking questions and asking questions. Starbucks' Howard Schultz on the right, and his number 2 from 94 to 2007, Howard Behar, were really good because one was analytical and one was intuitive. Schultz was an analytical genius, thought the answer to every question was in the numbers, and Howard Behar thought the answer to every question was going out and talking to people who ran the stores. And whenever they reached a flat spot in their growth, they conquered Seattle, and then their next move was to conquer Chicago, and it wasn't working. Schultz said, somewhere in the numbers, we're going to get the answer. Howard Behar said, send me out to Chicago for 6 months, and I'll talk to people and see what's going on. And it was the latter that solved the problem. Starbucks was growing so fast that the new store managers didn't even know what it stood for anymore. So they had to come up with a whole new mission statement and stuff like that, so that new employees knew what it was all about. And the old employees were reminded of what it was all about. That was sort of an intuitive observation. Here's another one, Fred Smith. Judy Astron was a researcher. She was head of R&D at Cisco, and Fred Smith brought her onto the board of FedEx in Memphis, Tennessee. Judy is based in Silicon Valley, to figure out network computing, because FedEx was over-invested in IBM mainframes, and now it's the beginning of the 1990s, and much cheaper, faster network computers from Sun Microsystems and others were proving adequate to do the job that FedEx was relying on mainframes for. So, FedEx was not competitive in its IT spend. And he knew that no one in Memphis really knew the future of network computing, so he brought a complete outsider on the board, said she served for 19 years, was the best board member he ever had at FedEx. And that's part of that whole brain idea. I see, the one sin, I've spoken for professionally for over 30 years, wearing the Forbes banner, and I know that there's a sin that is common and repeatable everywhere you go, and don't be the last speaker on the last day that goes on too long. The weather's perfect, and so I see that I have come to that point. This is a great point to stop. If any of you want my PowerPoint presentation, just contact the organizers of this conference and I'll get it to you. Just for giggles, the last point I was going to make was play around with this stuff. Just get smart about it yourself. I mean, I asked Anthropic's Claude how AI was going to change the insurance industry. Create 20 slides. And it did. Now, if you looked at it, you would say, I know 19 of those. I've heard that over and over again. But that's a starting point for you. I'm coming from an outsider, and to me it was like a wow. Imagine what you could get with more sophisticated questions, getting ever more sophisticated with every round. That's the whole point. It's not Google. It's just far, far beyond. Google is like having your own librarian at call. This stuff is like having your own Harvard MBA at call. So anyway, that was the point of that. You can see it in the slide presentation. I'm going to, if I'm ahead by inches, I'll take the lead and decide to quit while I'm ahead, and so liberate the rest of this fine day for all of you. Thank you very much for your time and attention.